Prime Minister Justin Trudeau set off for Latvia on Monday to visit Canadian troops ahead of his trip to the NATO summit in Brussels, a gathering that could put him at odds with US President Donald Trump over the alliance's conflict with Latvia's neighbor, Russia. Mr. Trump leaves for Brussels on Tuesday to kick off a week-long European tour. His last stop will be Helsinki, where he's meeting Russian President Vladimir Putin. Mr. Trump has long spoken of a rapprochement with Moscow, despite the 2014 invasion of Crimea, which has mobilized NATO forces to prevent similar aggression in Poland or the Baltic states, Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia. NATO has been the guarantor of Western security for almost 70 years, the Globe and Mail's Mark McKinnon explains. And internal divisions within it would greatly benefit Russia, or could spell the dissolution of the alliance. Monday to Tuesday, Mr. Trudeau left Ottawa on Monday morning for Riga, capital of Latvia, where 450 Canadian troops are part of a NATO mission to deter Russian aggression in the Baltic region. On Tuesday, he meets Latvia's Prime Minister and President, then tours with troops on the military base before leaving in the evening for Brussels. Wednesday to Thursday, in the Belgian capital, headquarters of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, Mr. Trudeau joins other leaders from the 29-nation military alliance for its annual meeting. The leaders will discuss how to work together to strengthen the international rules-based order and protect our citizens, the Prime Minister's office said in a statement, which added that Mr. Trudeau will reaffirm Canada's support for Ukraine. The Eastern European nation saw a Russian-backed Eastern Rebellion in 2014 and the Russian annexation of the Crimean Peninsula. Tuesday to Wednesday, Brussels is Mr. Trump's first stop on a week-long European tour. He is expected to press NATO allies to pay more for their joint defense. Kay Bailey Hutchison, the U.S. permanent representative to NATO, told reporters last week that the malign activities of Russia and the efforts of Russia to divide our democratic nations would be key topics in Brussels. Wednesday to Friday. Mr. Trump's visit to the UK isn't quite the state visit Prime Minister Theresa May promised him after his inauguration in 2017. Technically it's an official visit, though the British and American governments say a state visit will happen later. On Wednesday, Mr. Trump arrives in Britain for an evening gala with business leaders at Blenheim Palace, near Oxford. He meets Prime Minister Theresa May on Thursday, visiting an unspecified defense site before talks at the Prime Minister's country retreat, Chequers. On Friday Mr. Trump visits the Queen at Windsor Castle. In general, Mr. Trump's UK visit keeps him clear of London, where anti-Trump protesters plan to march on Friday and fly a blimp over Parliament depicting the US president as a screaming orange baby. Saturday to Sunday. Mr. Trump and his wife, Melania, are spending a private weekend in Scotland, where he owns 2 golf courses. Monday, the last stop on Mr. Trump's trip is Helsinki, where he is holding bilateral talks with Russian President Vladimir Putin. What is NATO? A primer how it started. NATO is a military alliance forged in the years after the Second World War, amid fears that the post-war Soviet Union would move the Iron Curtain further into Europe. Canada, the United States and 9 European nations were NATO's founding members, while the USSR set up a rival defense alliance called the Warsaw Pact. After the USSR's demise in 1989, NATO's membership grew considerably, and it now has 29 member states. Tensions with Russia. In 2014, tensions between NATO and Moscow reached a new post-Cold War high because of a Russian-backed separatist uprising in eastern Ukraine, followed by the annexation of Crimea from Ukraine. Western nations saw the pattern of Russian expansionism extending to regions of Georgia, and potentially the Baltic states of Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia. NATO began a mission to defend those countries called Operation Reassurance, which Canadian troops are still a part of. Tensions with Trump. When NATO's conflict with Russia first escalated, then US President Barack Obama was strongly critical of his Russian counterpart's expansionist aims. But during and shortly after the 2016 US election, Donald Trump was more dismissive of NATO. He said the alliance was obsolete, accused other NATO members of not paying their fair share and suggested that renewing ties with Russia was a good idea. He walked back the obsolete comment in 2017, and his administration tried to tread lightly on the Russia file amid investigations of Moscow's ties to the Trump presidential campaign. But last month, Mr. Trump disrupted the first day of the Group of Seven summit in Quebec by suggesting that Russia should be readmitted. Soon after, Washington and Moscow struck a deal to bring Mr. Trump and Mr. Putin together for talks in Helsinki on July 16. What Mr. Trump will say in Brussels about Russia is anyone's guess, but it has the potential to sow further division in the group. Tensions over money. Mr. Trump's criticism of NATO has also centered on money. Member countries agreed in 2014 to spend 2% of their GDP on defense within a decade. The US far exceeds the target, but most countries haven't met it yet, and Canada is near the bottom of the list in terms of spending by GDP. Last summer, Defense Minister Harjit Sajjan announced a $62.3 billion, 20-year spending plan that would raise defense spending to 1.4% of GDP by 2024-25. In the meantime, Mr. Trump has escalated criticism of NATO allies he accuses of shirking their responsibilities, accusations he reiterated in a recent letter to the Canadian government.